All right, now it's time for us to talk a little bit about goals and budgets in terms of the IMC process. Remember, we started off with who's the target audience, and then the second question is what are the objectives, the budget, and the tools? Well, in this particular lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about objectives, and we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting. So the communication objectives, virtually every marketing communication is designed to do one of three things: inform, remind, or persuade. But then within those areas, there are some additional things that we might want to have happen. All right, but remember that early on in the adoption process, we're typically informing people. Once we get you to know a little bit about our product, we then shift our communications plans to one to persuade you to try our product. And then once you've tried our product and are beginning to use it, we then shift to a reminder strategy where we keep reminding you to go out and buy our brand when you're thinking about product category purchases. All right, but then again, we are also interested in things like call to action, where, for instance, the communication objective might be to have you call your senator, or it might be to have you, sign up for the newsletter. Another communication objective might be to shift demand, that is, create much more demand for our product. So our communication objective might be to increase sales. Another might be to alter the elasticity of demand. And of course, this might be done a couple of different ways. But usually what happens with the elasticity of demand is we're trying to convince you that our product is better than all the other alternatives and there are no substitutes, and so we don't want we want the demand for our product category to be reduced. And of course we also then want the cross elasticity of demand to be reduced. So these are some of the kinds of communication objectives we might have with our marketing communications plan, our IMC plan. I always say that the best way to think about this is the before and after test. That is, how do you want the target audience to be different after they're exposed to your communication? Do you want them to be better informed? Do you want them to be more aware? Do you want them to have a different attitude change? Do you want them to be better educated about our product? Or do I just want to make sure that I create top-of-the-mind awareness? Now, the second thing that we want to talk about are promotional budgets. And your book talked about 5 different promotional budget approaches, 5 different ways that companies try to establish a promotional budget. At the end of the day, the question is, how much are we willing to spend on advertising? Many of you just saw that UNLV has a new Spirit logo, and they're going to be spending a lot of money on an advertising campaign to ingrain that logo into the marketplace. You saw, if you read the newspaper last week, that new logo, that UNLV spent $50,000 on a company to build that logo. That logo looks a lot like the Las Vegas Bandits logo from a couple of years ago, and so the question is, was it worth the $50,000? Well, it's all part of the promotional budget. So let's look at the 5 different approaches to establishing promotional. The first one we're going to talk about is the percent of sales budgeting approach, where I say, I anticipate that my sales are going to be, $1 million next year, and so I'm going to take 20% of those of that money from sales and spend it on advertising. All right, and so the idea here is that I set my sales budget based on past sales activities and my new sales projections. So lots of companies do it this way. There's one major problem with this approach in my mind, and that is, in this case, advertising is a function of sales, when we know that what we're trying to do is establish a strategy where sales are a function or are influenced by the amount of money I spend on advertising. So this actually puts the cart in front of the horse, instead of the other way around. A second approach is called a comparative parity budgeting approach, okay? And this is an approach where I find out how much my competitors are spending on advertising and spend the same amount. It's also called matching competitors or share of market strategies. Now, the problem with this particular approach is that it works fine if myself and my competitors are all in exactly the same position, and all of our customers are in the same position. But it may turn out that the adoption of my brand may be further or not as far down the process compared to the competitors. So I may not have the same goals and objectives, and if I don't have the same goals and objectives, I probably shouldn't have the same budget. The next approach is the all-you-can-afford budgeting approach. This isn't usually done very often, but this is the old argument of, and you see places like UNLV doing this, and they say, well, how much money do we have to spend on advertising? How much is available? And of course, that approach is a little bit odd, because if my sales are down, the amount of money that I can afford to spend on advertising probably also goes down. And if I then spend less on advertising, in theory, then my sales will go down again, and then I would have even less that I can afford to spend on advertising. And so you can see how this could easily create a downward spiral. And of course, then there's the approach that the book talked about, and that I highly recommend, and that's called the objective and task budgeting approach. This is where I sit down and say, here are my goals and objectives, here are the things that I'm going to have to do to reach those goals and objectives, and here's how much they're going to cost. This is also sometimes referred to as zero-based budgeting, or obviously task-based budgeting. This is the one, of course, that all of us would recommend, but it's important to understand that the other ones are out there. So when we develop the IMC program, let's remember that the things that we've talked about so far is identifying the target market, setting goals and objectives, and estimating the budget. But we also have to do other things in here. We have to select the right promotional tools. We have to design the promotion and schedule the promotion. Those particular steps are covered in the next couple of chapters in your book.